Greetings, Missouri Mid-South Conference. I bring you greetings today from my home office in Texas, where I've been for the first half of the week, and then I am traveling back today, which is Wednesday as I'm recording this, back to St. Louis for meetings and worship and all kinds of wonderful things. I bring you greetings especially as we continue to honor and celebrate Clergy Appreciation Month. After last week's video, many of you reached out to say thank you, both of clergy who appreciate that recognition and that awareness, but also of lay members in the reminder to celebrate our clergy. And on Facebook, I have enjoyed seeing the different ways that members have been very creative in honoring and celebrating their ministers and their clergy in their local setting. Today I want to continue to talk about Clergy Appreciation Month by focusing on a group of clergy that, especially in the places where I've been, we sometimes don't give them the same recognition, and we don't see them as often. Our relationship is not as strong as with ministers in local churches. And that is our clergy who serve in hospitals and in prisons and in university or seminary settings where they serve as chaplains. Chaplains are so significant in so many ways for not only many of us, but our family members and our community in those crisis moments, whether crisis of health or crisis of an emergency in someone being in prison. And the chaplain is the person who is present, is that spiritual companion. And what I often deeply respect about our chaplains is that whereas ministers in the local church setting have to do certain things in order to be granted ministerial standing in a local church, chaplains have to do that and more. Among ministers, chaplains, and most ministers are strongly encouraged or required to take what is known as CPE, Clinical Pastoral Education. And this is where a minister in training is connected with a hospital setting where they do chaplaincy, and they do chaplaincy training in order to train chaplains to serve in a wide ecumenical and interfaith setting, so that when a minister walks into a hospital room, that they have worked through their stuff, all that stuff that comes because we're human. And a part of what CPE does for all of us who are trained to be ministers of all type is that it requires that we dig deep into who we are and work through our stuff so that we can be more present, more spiritually grounded, but also more theologically and more personally present to the crises and the needs that are happening, so that we don't bleh on other people. I share all that to say that although this is, for a lot of our associations and in our conference, it's a requirement for all of our ministers in receiving ministerial standing, for chaplains, this is their bread and butter. And so I share that to say that our chaplains who have been endorsed by the United Church of Christ are extremely competent, knowledgeable, spiritually grounded, theologically mature. And I want to offer this time to say a personal word of thank you to our chaplains, because often we sometimes, and I'll confess that I sometimes unknowingly forget or leave out our chaplains when planning ministerial gatherings or clergy lunches or cluster groups, that we think of the ministers in the local church setting before we think of the chaplains in the hospital setting and in the prison setting and in hospice setting. And yet, when we hear the stories of Jesus and where Jesus says to love, it's in these very places. Jesus is saying, when you fed me, when you nourished me, when you visited me in prison, you were loving in God's way of love. And so I want to celebrate and say thank you to all of our chaplains, to those who are serving in the hospital setting, to those who are serving with progressive and inclusive love, to our prison system. And especially today, I want to say thank you to our chaplains who are hospice chaplains, especially because one of our own, the Reverend Rayla Stewart Hogue, is currently in hospice care. And what I know about Reverend Hogue and what I know about hospice care is that both Reverend Hogue and hospice care offers such a deep compassion that embodies God's love, that what Rayla has always embodied in her leadership in the Eastern Association Committee on Ministry, in her enhancements of worship at our conference annual gatherings, is that all are included, that God's love is so wonderfully wide and embracive, that God's love is for all of us. And those who serve as hospice chaplains walk into very difficult, painful situations and embody that kind of embracive, all-inclusive love as well. And so I want to honor and say thank you to the hospice chaplains, but also I want to honor especially the Reverend Rayla Stewart Hogue, whose ministry and whose testimony has been one that God calls us throughout our lives, and that our work and our joy is to live that out in our everyday lives and in the courageous ways in which we push ourselves so that we may live into who God created us to be. And that certainly has been Rayla. Jan Barnes, the Reverend Jan Barnes, has been Rayla's colleague in doing enhancements for our conference annual gathering. And she visited Rayla a few days ago and shared with me that Rayla's favorite scripture, one of her favorite scriptures, is Psalm 121. And so on this second week of Clergy Appreciation Month, as we remember the chaplains who are going beyond the walls of our sanctuary and embodying God's inclusive love, but especially as we celebrate and remember and hold up in our prayers and love Rayla, Jim, their son Jim too, and their daughter-in-law Maria. May we indeed hear the spirit of love and appreciation from God. I read as our reflection Psalm 121 as appreciation for Reverend Rayla Stewart Hogue and appreciation for all of our clergy serving as chaplains in hospital, hospice, prison, and academic settings. I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where will my help come? My help comes from God, who made heaven and earth. God will not let your foot be moved. God who keeps you will not slumber. God who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. God is your keeper. God is your shade at your side. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. God will keep you from all evil. God will keep your life. God will keep your going out and your coming in from this time on and forevermore. For this day we give thanks to all of the clergy who have lived out God's call to them to embody God's love to our brothers and sisters in hospitals, in prisons, in hospice, and in academic settings. We give you thanks. And for the ministry and life and spirit of the Reverend Rayla Stewart Hogue, for the ways in which you have embodied God's love. We give you thanks that God is with you, even and especially in the last breath of life and death and life beyond, this day and forevermore. Amen.